Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Global Cleveland's 2022 Sister Cities Conference. I'm Anthony Hiti, principal of Hiti, DiFrancesco, and Siebold Architects here in Cleveland, and it is my real pleasure to serve as a moderator for this morning's discussion on architecture in the city. I'm especially excited about this panel because it brings together four brilliant minds representing my three favorite cities in the entire world. First, Cleveland, my beloved hometown, the place where I live and work. Ljubljana, where I studied architecture for 2 years way back in the 1980s. And Vicenza, the Renaissance city of Andrea Palladio, a truly wonderful place that I visited many times. Before we get started, I would like to thank all of you for joining us virtually today, as well as our four panelists who are zooming in from all around the world. I also want to express our gratitude and appreciation to the sponsors and donors that have made the Sister Cities Conference possible this year. Thank you to Eaton Corporation, Swagelok, the Cleveland Hungarian Development Panel, the University of Akron, the Cleveland Rotary Club, the Lithuanian American Community Cleveland Chapter, the Slovenian Museum and Archives, the City of Cleveland, and the Cleveland Public Library. Today, we are grateful to have four incredible panelists that will share their perspectives on architecture and city design. From Vicenza, we have Francesco Marcarin. He holds a PhD in architectural history from the IUAV University of Venice and was a Columbia University Weinberg Fellow in Architectural History and Preservation. Francesco has performed archival and curatorial activities for several institutions, including the State Archives of Verona and the Frick Collection in New York City. He is currently the curator of the Palladio Museum in Vicenza, Italy. Noah Charney is an American professor of art history who completed studies at Colby College, the Cortland Institute, and Cambridge University. He earned his PhD in art history from the University of Ljubljana with a thesis on the Slovenian architect Jože Plečnik. He is the author of more than 15 books, including a bestseller and a Pulitzer Prize finalist. Dr. Charney has lived in Slovenia for more than a decade. Liliana Jankovic-Gabrielšek is an architect, urban designer, and spatial planner. For nearly 20 years, she worked in the private sector, managed her own design firm, and chaired the Association of Urban and Spatial Planners of Slovenia. Since 2013, Dr. Jankovic-Gabrielšek has been the head of the planning office in the Department of Urban Planning for the city municipality of Ljubljana. Lillian Curry is the executive vice president and chief operating officer of the Cleveland Foundation. In this role, Lillian is directing the community planning, design, and execution of the foundation's new headquarters building in Cleveland's Midtown Huff neighborhood. Lillian earned a Master's of Architecture and Urban Design from the Harvard University Graduate School of Design and is the chair of the City of Cleveland Planning Commission. We're going to ask each of our panelists to share a few words about their work and activities in their home cities. And then we will open it up for a conversation of how architecture and design impacts the quality of life in cities. At any time during this presentation, if one of the attendees has a general question for the panel or a specific question for any one of the panelists, please enter it into the chat box and I'll do my best to direct it accordingly. First up, we have Dr. Francesco Marcarin, who will tell us about his work in Vicenza, Italy. Doctor?
Thank you very much. Thank you for the invitation and good morning, everyone. So I will talk, opening maybe this session from an unusual point of view, talking about the present architecture, the role of architecture, but from the perspective from the past as a scholar of Renaissance architecture. And this is what the institution I work with, the Centro Studi Andrea Palladio, aims at doing every day. I have a short presentation I would like to share with you. So Vicenza is a small city if compared to other Italian cities, but it has a very strong identity and a global reputation thanks to Palladio. A symbol of the city, he's internationally renowned. For centuries, his architecture has been adopted as a model worldwide, from Russia to the United States. During World War II, Palladio's heritage was seriously damaged. And this is why in 1958, our study center was established to promote research and to define the guidelines for preserving Palladio's legacy. So to give you an idea of the impact of Palladio had on other cultures, often far from Vicenza in time and space, the most obvious place to start is America. In 2010, Palladio was officially acknowledged as the father of American architecture. And as a study center dedicated to Andrea Palladio, we are, of course, very proud of this. But at the same time, we're nearly aware of misinterpretations that may distort his architectural language and its message. It is part of our mission to correct them and to promote the positive message of his architecture, freed from cultural contaminations and superstructures. Today, Palladio is a byword for classicism and tradition. And I refer here to the executive order signed by former President Donald Trump on December 18, 2020. But in his day, his architectural language was actually totally innovative and marked a radical break with the Venetian tradition. Palladio was the perfect man in the right place, in a moment of radical transformation of the territory and society, in a moment of great economical flourishing. So traditional architecture was the Gothic architecture, the Venetian architecture, and Palladio introduced a reinterpretation of classicism in order to create a new shape for a new society. And Palladio's architecture, low-cost white buildings, must have upset many of his contemporaries in much the same way as Le Corbusier's Ville-Savoie did in the early 20th century. So today we, as a study center and as a museum, we work a lot on architecture. We talk about Palladio, we have a permanent collection of architectural models, we have exhibitions and publications on Palladio, but also we have several other projects based on Palladio and Palladio's architecture. One of them is dedicated to the people working at the US Army base here in Vicenza, a very important one. Our Army base here houses more than 8,000 people who spend 2 to 3 years here. So there is a yearly turnover of around 2,700 people. Not only military personnel, but also families with children. And we address to them our projects. And our projects are aimed at social inclusion, so creating connections between the Veneto architecture, architecture by Palladio, and a more familiar architecture to them, the neo-Palladianism of Thomas Jefferson and his followers in the US. So trying to creating connections and similarities, we share our legacy and our culture. And in the same way, we work a lot with families, with children, with schools, in a lot of projects dedicated to education. So can architecture be a tool for creating a better society, for creating a sensibility on architecture, social inclusion? Yes. Since 2014, we have been working a lot on this kind of project, educational projects, and we can say today, yes, they are very successful, and we will work in the future on this direction. So working on architecture, but to transmit other values on a more wider context. Thank you.
Thank you, Francesco. That was absolutely fascinating. Next, I would like to turn it over to Dr. Noah Charney, who will talk about the Slovenian capital city of Ljubljana. Doctor?
Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to talk about Plečnik. Plečnik was the subject of my PhD dissertation, and I came from a background studying art history, iconography of 16th century Florentine paintings, and also studying art crime, which is this slightly random specialization that I have, forgery and art theft and museum security. And I had the Plečnik project really fall into my lap when I was traveling through Europe, auditioning potential places to live as an expat. I was fascinated when I got to Ljubljana with the architecture I saw before I knew who the architect was. I think most people who come to Ljubljana who have an eye for this aesthetic are taken with some of the buildings, but then it only occurs after the fact, perhaps, to recognize that they're all by the same hand. So the reason that Ljubljana is so specifically the city of a single architect is because in 1895, there was a catastrophic earthquake that leveled 15% of the buildings in the center. That was in 1895. And Plečnik came of age at a time when commissions to rebuild the city, both in terms of urban planning and individual important buildings, were available to him. So he studied in Vienna, and he was tapped by Otto Wagner, who was the leading professor of architecture in Europe at the time, to take over his role in Vienna as the professor of architecture. But due to probably an anti-Slavic sentiment, 3 times he was nominated for this position, and 3 times the Archduke turned him down. And then he went to Prague. His probably highest profile work is the renovation of Prague Castle from a feudal fortress to a bastion of democracy for Tomáš Masaryk in the nascent Czechoslovakia. But then a university opened in Ljubljana in 1919, and there was suddenly a role for him there. And his older brother also bought a house, so he had a house to come home to. And he decided to forego the major centers of modernism like Paris and New York and come back to help rebuild his shattered hometown. It was a very personal decision, and he was an absolutely unique architectural talent. One of the things that I think is fascinating about him, but a reason he's not as well known as perhaps he should be, is that he did not join any of the major movements of the time, Siam or any other. He dabbled with secessionism, but it was only a brief flirtation, and he did not establish any movement. He had a large number of students, but none were at his level, and none carried on his aesthetic in the same way that he developed it. So he was a unique talent. So architectural history fans think he's great, and not everyone else knows about him, perhaps too few people. So one of the things I love doing is, in addition to the various day jobs that I have, mostly writing books, I like to introduce people to the wonders of Slovenia, which is my favorite country. I'm totally in love with it. I haven't met a single Slovene who is in love with it as all the expats who live here are, but that may be because we're not understanding all the subtleties behind the scenes. But so the reason I'm best known here is actually for a book that I wrote called Slovenology, Living and Traveling in the World's Best Country, which I genuinely believe. And I'm introducing Slovenes and foreigners to what is great about Slovenia. And one of the things that I guess too few Slovenes recognize as well is just how privileged we are to live in a city that was so largely developed by a single architectural genius, who in my opinion was by far the greatest of any Slovenian artist in any medium. So who was Plečnik? Plečnik was a very religious child of carpenter and master carpenter in Ljubljana, and he was showing promise at a very early age with draftsmanship, so he moved to Vienna to study. But he always had this idea that Ljubljana was, as he called it, a cultural backwater, and he wanted to try to elevate it, and to elevate it through architecture. And this is a Renaissance idea that through great architecture, through great public buildings, through the creation, commissioning, and presentation of great art, we can elevate the world around us. And he had that aspect to him. And he actually conceived of reconstructing Ljubljana as a new Athens, as he called it. And he could never have planned this, but he managed to get commissions for public buildings in Ljubljana that matched the major public buildings in a Greek polis, so an ancient Greek city-state. He built an Acropolis, a Parthenon, the equivalents, I mean, in Ljubljana, a theater, a market, a stadium, a necropolis or city of the dead. It's really remarkable if you have this lineup of what are the key public spaces in a Greek polis. He got commissions to build them himself. He was aided by the fact that he was very close friends with a leading art historian at the time, Frances Stele, and Matko Preloshek, who is the city engineer. And along with the heroic mayor, Ivan Hribar, they managed to form a tandem where Plečnik deservedly got the commissions that he did, but so much so that it is really, when we visit Ljubljana, it's Plečnik's city. This book is basically my PhD dissertation called Eternal Architect, the life and art of Jože Plečnik, modernist mystic. And what I like as an art historian and iconographer is to play this game of spotting the historical references in Plečnik's architecture. But picking up on what Francesco said, what Plečnik did was distinct, and I always use a point of contrast with the very first American architects. The earliest American architects, like Thomas Jefferson, like those who designed Independence Hall in Philadelphia and the White House, were not formally trained in architecture. A lot of them were gentlemen farmers. They were brilliant mathematicians. They were very creative, but they used Vitruvius, so the only ancient architecture handbook to survive to the modern era, as a sort of copy-paste manual. They would see a Corinthian column capital in Vitruvius, and they would say, okay, I'll stick one of those on the facade of my new building. And as a result, it was a copy-paste art historical reference game, whereas Plečnik never did that. Plečnik created what he would describe as the Stimmung, which is this German term for which there's no good translation, the vibe or feel of a period or a locality, and he would interpret it in his own way. And so there's none of the copy and paste, but in fact, there's the vibe of different art historical periods in all of Plečnik's work. He worked during modernism, but you can play the spot the art historical period game in just about everything he created. So I'm a huge fan. People who come to Ljubljana are also fans, even if they don't know what they're fans of or who they're fans of. And so for me, it's a pleasure to be able to introduce this hidden gem to more people. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to the discussion today.
Apologize for that. Thank you, Noah. Let's stay in Ljubljana and have a few comments from Lilian Yankovic-Grubelshek on her work as the head of city planning there. Dr.
Thank you. Thank you, my colleagues, Francesco, for this beautiful presentation of Vicenza and Palladio. I was there a few months ago and enjoying Basilica Rotonda and so on. So great. Sorry. And thank you, of course, Dr. Noah Charney, for this beautiful expression of Ljubljana. I believe the same. I know the same, and I feel the same. Plečnik is something special in Ljubljana as well. I have short presentation that I will share. Everything okay? Do you see it? All right. So dear attendants, happy to be with you. And for the invitation, and for my fellow Slovenians that I believe are here with us. Zelo vesela sem, da sem tukaj z vami in se zahvaljujem za povabilo. Okay, while Dr. Charney is a Plečnik expert, I will add as a Ljubljana city representative some points from the city perspective on spatial plan, on city design, and of course, on master architect Plečnik. Very short about Ljubljana. Ljubljana population is around 300,000, plus around 50,000 students, plus 140 commuters, plus many tourists, maybe too much. But we are becoming quite popular. We are maybe not so hidden gem as Noah said anymore. Okay, Ljubljana won a prestigious title of European Green Capital in 2016, and in 2021, last year, it was named as the best green capitals from the 10 years period so far. Being green, as you can see, that we are still the only green capital in this region of Europe, so central, southeast, and we were, of course, the first one from this part of Europe. Being green capital meant that we successfully preserved some very beautiful natural places in Ljubljana, such as Ljubljana Marshes Landscape Park, such as Tivoli Park with its extension to Rožnik and Šišenski Hrib, and that we by then made some successful renovations of former degraded areas. For instance, renovation of Koseza Point, you can see how beautiful it looks now, that it was full of waste and garbage. And for instance, Šmartinski Park, that is now the biggest new park arranged in Ljubljana in the last 10 years. Being green capital also meant that the city center was quite almost completely renovated, refurbished, redesigned. I mean, public spaces were redesigned. Former streets, former roads for motor vehicles were turned into pedestrian areas, and the city core was pedestrianized like 5 times more as they were 15 years ago. We can see embankment Cankarjevog Nabrežje, we can see Plečnik Striper Bridge, and an image to the city with Ljubljana Castle. So just 3 examples I would like to show you how Triple Bridge was formerly you see with cars, and now for more than 15 years there is already bicycle and pedestrian friendly area. Next example, I'm going very fast through many examples I could show you. The Ljubljana embankments in length of 5.3 kilometers, that is around 4 miles.
Liliana,
Yes,
your slides are not moving forward.
they are not.
No, so I think you need to click on the slides to advance them.
Sorry, so you are still on the first one.
Yes.
Sorry, what about now?
Still on the first one.
Still.
Yeah.
Wow. What about now?
No, I think you need to go in slideshow mode.
Well, I went on slide. Oh, sorry. What about now?
No.
Not. No. So sorry. I feel great slides.
There we go. Now it has advanced to the second slide.
It is.
Yes.
All right. It is. Okay. I was talking of European Green Capital. Okay. The third one, I was talking about green areas. Do you see now?
Yes.
Ljubljana Marshes, Koseza Point, and so on. Do you see city center?
Yes.
All right. Pedestrian areas, and thank you for telling me that. And I was then talking of Plečnik Striper Bridge. All right. And Ljubljana embankment in length of around 4 miles. This revitalization and refurbishment, rearrangement of Ljubljana embankments took around 10 to 15 years, and 7 new bridges were put into place. And Congress Square, bicycle pedestrian friendly area from 2011, but before, you see, it was a parking place. So it was all investment of the city. Why was I talking of green capital? Why was I presenting this oil renovation works in Ljubljana? Because they were very important for the nomination of Plečnik Ljubljana at the time was human capital designed by Josef Plečnik. It's not just one building, it's a grid, it's a network of his buildings and also urban renovations in Ljubljana in his time. Was very influential from 1920s till his death in 1957. And preparing this nomination for UNESCO World Heritage and then, of course, presenting how Plečnik works are now integrated into place of Ljubljana, into public place. It was so important that those public works were made, and that the surroundings of the Plečnik buildings were much more nicer than they were before. Okay, and when inspector from the UNESCO World Heritage Commission came to Ljubljana, I think it was in 1920, yes, and he was asking me as a city planner, how do we intend to preserve Plečnik's works through spatial planning? And I had quite clear answer that this is a special plan, and what is shaded with brown is all cultural heritage and cultural monuments. So all this part of the city center where most of Plečnik works are, but not all, is preserved as monuments, and there is ordinance in place that whatever it is permitted with spatial plan, we have to obey what Ministry of Culture has to say for some location. I'm just going to show you few images of the beautiful Plečnik's works that were nominated and are now part of UNESCO World Heritage. Church of St. Michael's in the edge of the Ljubljana marshes, National and University Library in Vegova Street, that is in the city center. Ljubljanica River embankment on both sides of Ljubljanica, and here is Triple Bridge, and of course, Necropolis, as now Charlie said, Žale Central Cemetery. I will for now end with this. Thank you. Sorry, have you seen all the slides?
Yes, we saw them. Thank you.
Yes,
Thank you. Thank you.
thank you, Liliana. Our final panelist is from Cleveland, Lillian Curry. Lillian?
Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you are, if you're there in Cleveland. Welcome to Cleveland. It's an honor for the Cleveland Foundation to be on this panel and to welcome you to our city. Just a little bit about the Cleveland Foundation. For those of you who don't know, we are the world's first community foundation. And we're the oldest, obviously, and also still one of the largest. And what that means is that we hold donations and gifts and contributions over the years now totaling $3.2 billion. And we invested in Cleveland, Cuyahoga County and surrounding communities. And our goal is simple, which is to really help be a partner in the health, wellness, and prosperity, both of our city and the people in it. And so we work to do that through nonprofit partners. But the story I'm going to tell you today is about something going on in our city that our foundation is working on, and its history. And it's just one piece of many amazing things going on in the city that you're going to see while you're here. But it is the particular one that I am working on at the foundation. So I will tell you this story. But the story has to start with our theater district, which I know you're close by since you're at Cleveland Public Library. And why I'm starting here is because more than 40 years ago, it's hard to imagine that there was a time in our city where we were going to demolish the theater district, the second largest theater district in the United States, second only to New York City. And this slide on the left side is when all these theaters were boarded up and the wrecking ball was about to come to demolish one of the most important architecturally significant and culturally significant districts in our city. And our foundation at that time used our endowment to actually buy the two largest buildings, the Buckley and Seltzer buildings. And we held them in with our endowment while Playhouse Square, the organization, formed to save the district. And why this is important for two reasons. One is that by the Cleveland Foundation using our assets to literally days before they were going to be demolished, is we changed the conversation from blight to the cultural and historical significance and what that would mean for our city. And there was a conversation about that shifted from blight to kind of a nucleus of importance for our city. And the slide to the right is what it looks like today. So it's hard to imagine that there was a moment in this city when we were about to do something so tragic. But what's important for the Cleveland Foundation is we moved our offices into the building, which is called the Hanna Building, and we have been here for now more than 40 years as part of this district in helping to really revitalize it with the Playhouse Square Foundation, who really led the way around this incredible theater district. But now, fast forward to a few years ago, we started to ask ourselves a question about Cleveland. Our lease was coming due, and could we move our foundation and think of ourselves as an anchor institution? And could we think about another 30 or 40-year transformation with our own move of our headquarters? And since you're in Cleveland, you'll know Cleveland's a really interesting place that actually has two downtowns, where you are in downtown and University Circle, which is our cultural core. And we have a public transit system, a BRT system down the middle, Euclid Avenue. But this is a city that feels like two downtowns, not one connected city. So the question we asked ourselves is, could we move the foundation to the middle and work collaboratively with partners to create one connected city? So it's not just about a building, it's about, once again, a 30 to 40-year idea that might have a generational change on the city of Cleveland. And that's what we embarked on 3 years ago to think about with our own move of our own offices. The other important thing about Cleveland, and this is a redlining map of Cleveland, so you can see downtown and University Circle. What redlining is a time when the banks in the United States redlined parts of the city and would not lend there, primarily historically Black neighborhoods. And the persistence of racism and structural inequities that have come from this still exists today. So the second question we asked ourselves is, while there's much revitalization and activity in certain neighborhoods around downtown, very little of that has been creating change or transformation in these red line neighborhoods. And could we do something similar to Playhouse Square and change that big conversation around the persistence of racism? And all of the maps in these areas, if I were to show you infant mortality or lead or health disparities, look exactly like this. So the many layers of this still exist today. So we are locating here in the middle and working to think about what this transformation would look like. Our foundation acquired land in the middle, this 11 acres. One of the most polluted sites actually in America, it's on a top 10 list, was a plating company that was emitting also bad air quality into the neighborhoods to the north of Huff. And we have now cleaned up this 10 acres, proud that we were able to do this, and assembled, in my opinion, on public transit, a very important kind of transformational site here, of which we're not only working on connecting east-west, this is the plan for that district, about 1 million square feet, but also thinking about what it will take to change this city from just east-west to connect those neighborhoods north-south. There's a very strong plan to really think about what has happened by disconnecting historically Black neighborhoods from businesses and other things to the north and south. So this plan shows our headquarters here, which I will show you architecturally, and now a second building that we're building with other partners who are like Magnet and others who are coming here. There's also one of the only urban wineries, Chateau Huff, founded by Mansfield Fraser, a very famous Black leader here in Cleveland, who created an urban winery that is part of this cultural corridor that I'll show you on 66. So this represents this new vision, which also includes transforming the Dunham Tavern Museum, the oldest structure in Cleveland ever built on a foundation. This is about the size of Bryant Park in New York, and we're working collaboratively to turn this outwardly as a central park that will be equidistant from Public Square and Wade Oval in Cleveland, which are two parks on either end, to create this there that's missing in the middle of a scale enough to transform both the neighborhoods and the city to be connected. As I described, north-south is as important as this district here, this 10 acres. And it's this incredible culturally rich corridor along East 66, which includes League Park Museum, which was the old baseball stadium before the Guardians was built. And now along this, we are celebrating and working collaboratively with resident-led projects to develop a Black cultural corridor along East 66 that also celebrates the rich history and assets that are here. A little bit about the foundation's new building. This is important. This is a rendering of our lobby, and I just will pause here to say, this move and this work that we are doing is not just about architecture, but it's about change of our foundation as well. This was inspired by the architect Pascal Sablan, who worked with us here, who said that our foundation should really think about transparency, warmth, not to feel like an office building. We're building a mass timber building that will feel like home when you walk in, that also makes philanthropy feel less opaque. Programmatically, we're changing everything about the way we do. We've created a building that has no real front door, that's porous on all sides, that opens completely to the park and to the street in a way that feels more retail than office. And to think about the ground plane of this district as a new way to think about what accessibility in the community means. We're under construction. Next time you come, we'll be open in January. The mass timber is really pretty extraordinary. And we're building a second building, which will start construction, that brings many partners together here into the district, that starts construction in a few months. So I'll stop there. I could talk forever. This is the second building across the street from the first one, which will be an innovation and collaboration center that is focused on community health and wellness and access to resources for the community. And that is coming next.
Lillian, thank you so much. That is so exciting what the Cleveland Foundation and the rest of the Cleveland design community is trying to accomplish in making our city a better place to live and work. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of the panelists for their unique individual perspectives. And I guess I'll try to weave together what each of the panelists have said and then offer up some questions and comments that I hope each of you can address. It seems that everyone in one way or another has discussed how the historic past, the historic built past, is still living today. And it's interesting to me how both Vicenza and Ljubljana have leveraged that historic past and are building on it to make a better place, not only for the citizens that live in those cities, but making them attractive and interesting places for the entire world. So Francesco, I'll go back to you in the beginning. Can you talk a little bit more specifically how the legacy of Andrea Palladio makes Vicenza a better place today? Okay.
Well, first I was really surprised that the fil rouge, the connection between our presentations, was the loss of architectural heritage and the idea of creating the preservation, so transmitting a heritage. And Palladio is famous all over the world, and tourists come to Vicenza to see Palladio. And we are working in that direction to have more people coming here, so to create interest and knowledge on Palladio. But the other point is that even people who were born in Vicenza and live in Vicenza grew up with Palladio. Everyone is used to see Palladian villas everywhere, palaces, and they don't have the perception of the importance, the uniqueness of Palladio. So we're working on both directions. And our museum, our institution really aims at being a reference point, a connecting point. So we're talking both to people from Vicenza and to tourists. And architecture, Palladio's architecture from the past can make Vicenza a better place. from a social point of view. So creating inclusion in our projects for education, for kids, for families, for foreigners, for tourists. And also we work also on a very delicate front, that is the preservation of cultural heritage. So very recently we worked with the Ministry of Culture on the preservation of the land, so the landscape around the Villa Rotonda, so to protect an entire area of the city, of the suburbs, a natural area, to maintain a context around Palladio and around the city of Vicenza. So creating this idea of a better place where to live, not just for tourists, and creating a sensibility on the heritage. So we're surely working on that direction, not actually on new architecture, on new architecture that will be built, but on the taking knowledge and taking understanding the importance of the roots and the culture.
Thank you, Francesco. Noah, perhaps you could continue sort of this thread of the conversation and talk about how Plečnik's work, especially the way he used very minute details and ornament and unique idiosyncratic design that he had to not only make individual buildings, but to really tie together the entire city of Ljubljana.
Well, it's a good point that you make. Plečnik was aware that he had not a blank canvas, but a severely damaged one that needed a lot of new buildings reconstructed. He wasn't certain that he was going to get all of the commissions. That was something that he always had to compete for, although he was far and away the best candidate. But he was thinking in terms of creating a new cultural center in a city that really wasn't a cultural center beforehand. It was a capital, but it really felt cultural backwater sounds rather derogatory when you put it in those terms. That's how he viewed it, and I think that's how a lot of people viewed it too. So he was trying to start from what was a very modest level and work up from it. One of the things I think is an interesting point of distinction is that Palladio is such a household name and so famous. He's the architect that people will go to Vicenza because they want to see Palladio. Whereas in Ljubljana, people come to Ljubljana and then find Plečnik when they get there. But it's quite rare for somebody to say, I need to go to Ljubljana because I love Plečnik's architecture. Now, I would love to have more tourists who are Plečnikophiles coming, and maybe Liliana would prefer if they're not quite in the city center, but maybe spread out a little bit more to the peripheries. But one of the things that I do, because I help Slovenian tourist organization trying to figure out not only ways to bring people, because we do have enough tourists by number, but to get them to do things that are not clogging up the city center and then the center of Bled, which is the other international destination that people come to. And one of the things to do is say, do you see this architecture? Look how wonderful it is. Well, you can see other works by Plečnik that are not in the heart of the city center, but you can take Plečnik walks and you can go to places that are a short, say 5-minute drive from the city center, or even go to a town. I live in a town called Kamnik, which is 25 minutes north of Ljubljana. And it's got quite a few Plečnik buildings here too. So trying to take advantage of the fact that when people get here, they are intrigued by the architecture that they see, but they rarely know who built it. Plečnik would love the idea that there's a Plečnik's Ljubljana, and that he has essentially developed a Stimmung, this vibe that people equate with Slovenian architecture and certainly with Ljubljana. I've sometimes been asked, what is Slovenian architecture? And the only answer is it's the atmosphere that this unique architect created when he created it that no one's been able to replicate. It's also interesting that there is not a single iconic building in Ljubljana that everybody knows. And there are advantages and disadvantages to that. But if you have something like Sagrada Familia in Barcelona or Notre Dame in the Eiffel Tower in Paris, you have this thumbtack in the imagination of the public that is they see that image and they know that's the city we're talking about. Ljubljana doesn't have that. It might have. There was an unbuilt Pličnik project for this amazing parliament that was going to be called the Cathedral to Freedom, with this enormous conical dome with sloping columns on the inside that was designed but never built. It was a little too out there for the administration to green light. But as a result, people have a pleasant, positive vibe about Ljubljana. They understand that it's a green city. At some point, it had the most pedestrianized percentage of the center of anywhere in Europe, and that it's a lovely, charming place to be, but it's missing that iconic monument. And as a result, people come and they feel the Pličnik vibe. I'm not sure that answers your question, Anthony, but here you go.
No, it really does. And I think that is really what makes Ljubljana, at least in my mind, and based on my experience, such a wonderful place. It's the vibe. It is that Stimmung that really makes it work. But extending that into the realm of sustainability and green design, Ljubljana as a green capital city is very important. And I think one of the ways that has been accomplished is through historic preservation. Clearly, the greenest building, the most sustainable building, is a building that's already standing. In Ljubljana, perhaps you could talk a little bit how Ljubljana continues its efforts in historic preservation and using that past to generate further growth and economic development in the city.
Yes. First, I think Noah is right. Maybe in Ljubljana, the building, the one is missing. That would be on the Castle Hill, the parliament that Noah was talking about, but Pličnik was never, of course, put into place. But still, the castle is maybe the building of Ljubljana, because it got the most visitors going to castle. There is funicular to the castle. So I don't know, still the castle is a sort of a father looking down into Ljubljana. But to go to your question, well, we are quite strict about the preservation of the historic heritage. We do not have it just from Pličnik. It was a Roman town that was 2000 years ago in the place where nowadays is Ljubljana. It was then medieval town, and all these not great, but all these past layers that the city has one after another. It was, of course, by dwellers civilization 5,000 years ago on the Ljubljana Marsh, and then Roman time, medieval, and so on. Secession period, modernistic, of course, period also very important, and all these layers have to be preserved somehow. But of course, as it is in the nature of people, the most valuable to us still are that one that are the oldest, you know. And now I'm going to conference tomorrow about the modernistic architectural heritage. It's also important in Ljubljana. It was a bustling building period, but Pličnik is only one. It's one and only. I would agree, of course, with Noah. He made the city to become a capital. It was not before. That's why we say master, Pličnik, Mojster.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, thank you, Liana. I think that you're exactly right, that there are many layers of history in Ljubljana. And I think one of the successful aspects of both Pličnik's work and the way Ljubljana has continued to grow is how well it's managed all of those layers of history and tie them together in a way where they can be understood and interpreted. Based on that, Lily, I'd like you, both in your role with the Cleveland Foundation and the Planning Commission, to talk a little bit about the city of Cleveland's challenges with history. Cleveland is a city that is shrinking in population, and we have a legacy of buildings that can no longer be used in there as they were originally intended to be used. If you could perhaps talk about the role of adaptive use, historic preservation in the city, and how it's contributing to the success of the city beyond what we saw down in Playhouse Square.
Sure. Well, I think, obviously we're young. We feel like we're an old city, but we're really young when we look at the panelists here. And cities are built over many decades and many centuries. And so being a young city, I think we're still layering and building on our rich cultural history, but open to also what can come that is new. So I think the city has done a tremendous job. We were not hit too hard by, let's say, the urban renewal period here. We were a little bit. So in the downtown core and some neighborhoods, I think most of the adaptive reuse has been done. And now I think the question we have before us in Cleveland is how to build new upon what we have lost from being a shrinking city. And I think the big question for us is how to do that, to raise up and to build some of the history that has been wiped out, and celebrate and bring to the surface, as we are trying to do in Midtown, some Black history and culture that was systemically erased. And how do you do that with community, not for community, and in a new way that empowers residents and community leaders and people who have stayed in neighborhoods and communities to decide and to work together on what history is told and how we do celebrate that culture. So that is a challenge for our city. But I think we're doing it in many neighborhoods in many ways. And I think the hallmark of that for me, and how I see that at the planning commission level for the city across the whole city as we look to work, is to think about it from an asset point of view, but most importantly, from a resident engagement point of view, a transparency point of view, allowing the community to be engaged in the civic process in a way that maybe we haven't been in the past. And I think that's sort of the hallmark of my tenure, I hope, as the chair of the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Lillian. Sort of continuing on that notion of community engagement and the role of the broader society in creating architecture, when you look at Palladio and his Renaissance expression of architecture, and Jože Plečnik and his uniquely Slovenian interpretation of his culture, how successful do you think a broader community-based or a community-engaged architecture can be in elevating the community and elevating the city? Lillian?
Well, for me, maybe I would be less inclined to think about the specific architectural style, because I think going forward, one of the reasons why we chose to build our building out of mass timber was that it could respect the historical site that it is sitting on, and respect a transition from a very old tavern on the first foundation, but it also could be contemporary. So it allows the idea of respect to the past, but looking forward to the future in a more contemporary way, and also allows for a new message or a new why our foundation is going there, is to kind of crack wide open the idea of who has access to philanthropy and who feels that it's for them. So in the architecture, the design of our building, I think we have accomplished that, but it isn't as much just about the architecture. It may do that, but if a donor and a resident don't walk into our building and feel that they're welcome and treated the same way, it doesn't matter what the building looks like. So it also had to, the process of us thinking about the actual architecture and how it could do that also had to change us as an organization. And so I would argue that the architecture is important, but it also requires the kind of engagement with the community and the why you might be thinking about transformation in cities.
That's a perfect response, Lillian, and I think that's really at the heart and at the essence of what both Palladio and Plečnik felt. What was going to be the impact? How was an individual or group going to feel as they experienced that work? I know that we're running close to the end of our period, and I do have another question, and I maybe Noah and Liliana can respond. And I know that it was somewhat controversial when Ljubljana closed off automobile traffic to most of the center city. And I'm wondering if you could respond, what an impact has that had on sort of the everyday quality of life for people who live and work there, and then what it means more broadly from a sustainability standpoint. And Noah, why don't you start, and then Liliana, you can jump in.
All right. No, yes.
I can do the non-technical, non-scientific side. So for visitors, it's great having a pedestrianized center. It's much calmer. It's very lively because you know, there's plenty of tourists and locals who are strolling through the center of Ljubljana every day. So it feels like there's sometimes a danger if you cut off traffic that certain parts of a city can turn into ghost towns, but it's not at all the case. It's really a huge benefit. And I think a selling point for tourists that throughout the center, you can walk comfortably, and the only car you're going to see is one of these great free electric golf carts that will pick you up and drive you anywhere you need to go. And otherwise, it's pretty safe that you're not going to be bothered. So it's been lovely, and I think tourists think it's great. It's a step more complicated to have to think where to park right outside the city center, but being honest, you know, it's a 10-minute walk from the train station and all the parking you could want to the heart of the center, because it's a very small city. So I think it's really nothing I could imagine complaining about, although I'm sure somebody came up with something to complain about. Maybe Liliana can tell them the more scientific side.
Yes, it's just great, and benefits are also vast and great and important, but the process was quite complicated because especially putting the main road that was from Roman times, going from the south to the north, Cardon the Cumanus Bridge, you know, to only shed space for public transport, for bicyclists and for pedestrians was an issue. There were debates with citizens, there were debates with locals, and at first, of course, they were pro and contra, but it was put into place as to be, you know, not, how to say, temporary, and of course it stayed as such, and the benefits are just great. And there is an anecdote, because you asked, do we have to share, can we share some anecdote that our mayor Jankovic, the same as me, but we are not relatives. He was, of course, all the time on the terrain, observing how they are building, you know, workers and so on. And there was a street that was meant to be closed for traffic. And he always said, hurry up, hurry up. He was pushing, you know, to have many arrangements ended and so on. And for that street, he said, don't hurry. And they asked, is something wrong with the mayor? And he said, no, just don't hurry. You just see how locals will use to this. And then locals, of course, started to like this new arrangement, and they were asking to remain this as permanent arrangement.
Thank you, Liliana, and thank you to all of our panels for all of their wonderful insight. I found it not only encouraging and inspiring, but I think it was you know, a very wonderful way to tie together three of our wonderful sister cities, Cleveland, Ljubljana, and Vicenza. So thank you all for participating today. I would like to also thank and extend our appreciation to all of those that participated, both in person down at Cleveland Public Library and here virtually. And once again, I would like to thank the sponsors and donors who made this conference and panel possible: the Eaton Corporation, Swagelock, the Cleveland Hungarian Development Panel, the University of Akron, Cleveland Rotary Club, Lithuanian American Community, the Slovenian Museum of Archives, the City of Cleveland, and Cleveland Public Library. Finally, for those of you that are here in the City of Cleveland, please be sure to check out the exhibit that's currently in place at Cleveland Public Library on the work of Jože Plečnik. It is going to be opening immediately following this panel there in the library. So all of the people that are in Cleveland or coming to Cleveland, I hope you take advantage to learn more about the great work of Plečnik. Again, thank you to our panelists and have a wonderful day. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Bye.